Ravenel, the traveler, artist, and poet, tossed his magazine on the floor. Sammy Brown, a clerk who worked for a broker and sat by the window, got a little startled. "What's up, Ravi?" he asked. "Are the critics criticizing your stuff?" Ravenel said, "A romance is dead," in a light way. When he spoke lightly, he was usually serious. He picked up the magazine and flipped through its pages. "Even someone like you, Sammy, who's not into artsy stuff, should get it," said Ravenel in a serious tone, which meant he was speaking lightly. "Look at this magazine that once had writings by famous people like Poe, Lowell, Whitman, Bret Harte, Du Maurier, Lanier, and others. But now, in the current issue, we have an article about the workers on battleships, a revelation about how liverwurst is made, a long story about a Wall Street deal with baking powder, a poem about a bear the president missed, a story by a young woman who spied while making overalls, and another fiction story smelling of the garage and a specific car brand. Of course, the title includes the words Cupid and chauffeur. There's also an article on naval strategy with pictures of the Spanish Armada and the new Staten Island ferry boats, another story about a political boss winning the love of a Fifth Avenue belle by giving her a black eye and not voting for a bad law. It doesn't say if it was in the street cleaning department or Congress. And 19 pages of the editors boasting about how many copies they sell. The whole thing, Sammy, is like a notice declaring that romance is dead." Sammy Brown sat comfortably in the soft chair by the open window. His suit was a strong brown with visible patterns, matching the ends of 4 cigars poorly hidden in his vest pocket. His shoes were light tan, socks gray, linen sky blue, and his collar, where a black butterfly had landed, was snowy, high, and hard. Sammy's face, less important, was round, pleasant, and pinkish, and there was no sign of romance fleeing in his eyes. Ravenel's window opened to an old garden full of ancient trees and plants. The apartment building stood high on one side, a tall brick wall protected it from the street. Across from Ravenel's window, an old mansion hid in the shade of summer leaves. The house was like a castle under attack. The city howled and roared, banging on its double doors and waving white checks, offering to stop the attack. Gray dust covered the trees. The siege got worse, but the drawbridge didn't come down. No more chivalry language works. Inside lived an old man who loved his home and didn't want to sell it. That's the whole story of the castle under siege. Every week, Sammy Brown visited Ravenel's place 3 or 4 times. He was part of the Poets Club. Although the old Browns were famous, Sammy had become more ordinary due to business. He didn't feel sad about romance being gone. The sound of the ticker machine touched his heart, and when it came to horses and scores and sports, he was a bit like a Pink edition. He liked sitting in the soft chair by Ravenel's window. Ravenel didn't mind much. Sammy seemed to enjoy the talk, and the broker's clerk was a perfect example of the present day's practicality, which Ravenel found interesting. "I know what's bothering you," said Sammy, showing his business smarts. "The magazine rejected some of your poetry. That's why you're upset." "That would be a good guess on Wall Street or in a campaign for a women's club presidency," said Ravenel quietly. "Now, there's a poem, let me call it that, of mine in this magazine." "Read it to me," said Sammy, watching a cloud of pipe smoke he had just blown out the window. Ravenel wasn't better than anyone else, not even Achilles. Everyone has a weak spot. The someone or other must catch us somewhere when she dips us in the something or other that makes us safe. He read this verse from the magazine out loud. "The 4 roses. I put 1 rose in your hair. White rose, meaning worth. And you put one on your chest. Red rose, love sign of birth. You took one from its stem. Tea rose, meaning forever. And one you gave, that had for me the thorns of memory. That's really good, said Sammy, impressed. There are 5 more verses, Ravenel said, sarcastically patient. People usually pause at the end of each. Of course. Oh, let's hear the rest, buddy, shouted Sammy apologetically. I didn't mean to interrupt you. I'm not great with poetry, you know. I've never seen a poem that didn't look like it should have clear endings for each verse. Tell me the rest. Ravenel sighed and put the magazine down. Sure, said Sammy happily. We'll do it next time. I'm off now. Got a plan at 5 o'clock. He took a final look at the shaded green garden and left, whistling a tune from a silly comedy, not hitting the right notes. At 4 in the afternoon, Ravenel looked out across the garden. In the window, he saw 4 small vases with big, fully opened roses, some red, some white. As he looked, the woman leaned over them, making them look less lovely with her own beauty, and it seemed like she was looking thoughtfully toward his window. Then, as if she noticed his respectful and eager look, she disappeared, leaving the sweet symbols on the windowsill. Yes, symbols. He would be unworthy if he didn't understand. She had read his poem, The 4 Roses, it touched her heart, and this was her romantic response. She must know that Ravenel, the poet, lived across her garden. She probably saw his picture in magazines. The delicate, tender, modest, and flattering message couldn't be ignored. Beside the roses, Ravenel noticed a small pot with a plant. Without hesitation, he grabbed his opera glasses and used them from behind his window curtain. A nutmeg geranium. With a true poetic instinct, he took a book of useless information from his shelves and opened it at The Language of Flowers. Geranium, nutmeg, I expect a meeting. That's right. Romance never does things halfway. If she comes back, she brings gifts and her knitting and will sit in your chimney corner if you let her. Now Ravenel smiled. Lovers smile when they think they've won. Women in love stop smiling with victory. He ended a battle, she started hers. How nice to put the 4 roses in her window for him to see. She must have a sweet, poetic soul. Now to plan the meeting. A whistling and doors slamming announced Sammy Brown's arrival. Ravenel smiled again. Even Sammy was touched by the Renaissance. Sammy, with his fancy clothes, horseshoe pin, round face, common slang, and admiration for Ravenel, the broker's clerk, was a perfect opposite to the new, bright, unseen visitor to the poet's dark apartment. Sammy went to his usual spot by the window and looked out at the dusty green leaves in the garden. Then he checked his watch and stood up quickly. Goodness, he said. It's 20 after 4. I can't stay, old man. I've got a date at 4:30. Why did you come, then? Asked Ravenel, jokingly sarcastic. If you had a meeting at that time. I thought you business guys kept better track of your minutes and seconds. Sammy hesitated at the door and blushed. Actually, Ravi, he explained, like someone explaining to a customer with no more money, I didn't know I had it until I got here. Let me tell you, there's a fantastic girl in that old house next door that I really like. I'll be straight, we're engaged. The old man says no, but I don't agree. He keeps her pretty close. I can see Edith's window from here. She lets me know when she's going shopping and I meet her. It's at 4:30 today. Maybe I should have explained earlier, but I know it's okay with you so long. How do you get your tip, as you call it? Asked Ravenel, losing a bit of spontaneity from his smile. The next day, Ravenel, while fixing a rough line in a new poem, lay by the window looking at the besieged garden of the homeowner who didn't want to sell. Suddenly, he sat up, spilling 2 rhymes and a syllable or 2. One window of the old mansion was clearly visible through the trees. In that window, covered in flowing white, leaned the angel of all his dreams of romance and poetry. Young, fresh like a dewdrop, graceful as a spray of clematis, giving the garden surrounded by loud traffic the feel of a princess's room, beautiful as any flower sung by a poet, that's how Ravenel saw her for the first time. She stayed for a while and then went inside, leaving a few notes of a bird-like song to reach his fascinated ears through the noise of cabs and the sound of electric cars. It seemed like she wanted to challenge the poet's disregard for romance and punish him for not respecting the everlasting spirit of youth and beauty. The power of this vision was so strong that, in an instant, the atoms of Ravenel's entire world were rearranged. The heavy carts passing her house sounded like a deep double bass playing a love song. The shouts of newsboys were like the singing of birds. That garden was the pleasure garden of the Capulets. The janitor was an ogre, and Ravenel felt like a knight, ready with a sword, lance, or lute. This is how romance appears in the city, amid buildings and bricks, when she gets lost and a general alarm has to be sent out to find her again. "Roses," said Sammy shortly. "4 of them today?" "Means 4 o'clock at the corner of Broadway and 23rd. "But the geranium?" Ravenel insisted, reaching for the end of Romance's trailing robe. "Means 1/2 past," as Sammy shouted from the hallway. "See you tomorrow."